Hello guys and welcome to my channel. I'm Peter and today we are diving into a profound question. Does morality prove God's existence? It's a question that has been asked for centuries and one that is still deeply relevant today. In this video, I'll be exploring whether our sense of right and wrong can lead us to a higher power or if it's something entirely different. So stay tuned as we explore this topic. So let's dive into this topic that is still relevant for today. This topic promises to be an interesting one. Now, when we talk about morality, we are not just talking about rules and regulation, but a deep sense of good and bad, right and wrong that guides us in our everyday choices. The moral law is the impulse within us that nudges us to do what is right. These moral laws goes by different names. Some call it moral values, moral code, law of nature, law of decent behavior, and so on. Many people believe that this sense of morality must come from somewhere, right? But where does it come from? Let's head over to the next slide to find out the various arguments that have been posited. Philosophers, theologians, and thinkers have debated this question for ages, and today we continue to explore whether our moral beliefs are a reflection of a divine creator, or if they are something we have just come to agree upon through social convention. Moral relativism argues that our sense of morality is a product of evolution, a tool for survival and social cohesion. Moral objectivism argues that moral truths are universal, independent of human opinions or feelings. But which is closer to the truth? Let's break this down a little. One of the strongest arguments for morality pointing to God is the idea of a universal moral law. No matter where you are in the world or what culture you belong to, there are certain things that are seen as universally wrong. Things like murder, stealing, or lying. Nobody will agree that torturing babies for fun is right, or that murdering an innocent person is right either. Now, why do these things seem wrong to us across all cultures? In looking for the source or origin of the moral law, we are talking about the ontology of morality. Ontology simply means origin. There have been arguments about the origin of morality. The moral relativist says morality is a human construct arising from human preferences, opinions, or feelings. However, there's a problem with that. In saying morality is relative, we have no basis to judge an action as good or bad. If someone, for example, murders an innocent man, I have no basis as a moral relativist to say he did wrong. After all, he was just acting based on his preference, opinion, or feelings. No opinion or preference is better than the other, by the way. Thus, moral relativism removes all ground for any argument about right and wrong. That, for me, is very problematic. In this regard, the moral objectivists have a better footing because right and wrong have a standard. So let's look at arguments that favor moral objectivism and some objections and counter objections. Premise 1. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Let's move on to the next slide and see the arguments that support moral objectivism. One of the strongest arguments for morality pointing to God is the idea of a universal moral law. No matter where you are in the world or what culture you belong to, certain things are universally seen as wrong: murder, stealing, or lying. As I earlier mentioned, nobody believes murdering an innocent man or torturing babies for fun is good. Why do these things seem wrong to us across all culture? Take for example, someone invents a board game. He creates the rule for the game with the intent of fulfilling the goal of the game. The players who play the game don't make up the rules. For the goal of the game to be achieved, for there to be fair play, the players must abide by the rules made by the creator of the game. The existence of a universal moral law presupposes a creator who, though is invisible, has an intent or purpose for life. In order for that purpose to be achieved, we as humans must abide by the moral law. The question then is, can evolution explain morality? There is no real purpose to evolution. It's just a series of random or chance occurrences that accumulate over time to make the fittest organism survive. Evolution only describes what does survive, not what ought to survive. That is, evolution is descriptive rather than prescriptive. More on that in the next slide. The moral law is different from physical law, such as the law of gravitation, law of thermodynamics, law of magnetism, and several others. Take for example the law of gravitation. A stone cannot help but obey the law of gravitation. Why? Because it does not have a will. However, in the case of the moral law, it is different. Human beings are moral agents. We have a will. We can make the choice to obey the moral law in form of the voice of our conscience within us, or we can choose to disregard it. The moral law is peculiar to man because of our free will. While animals may operate on instinct or survival-based behavior, humans are capable of moral reasoning, of distinguishing between right and wrong, and choosing between either in complex situations. Like I said previously, evolution describes the random changes that happen to organisms to make them survive, and not what they ought to do. It is descriptive rather than prescriptive. In everyday life, we often feel obligated to do the right thing, like helping a friend in need or telling the truth, even when it's hard or not beneficial to us. But think about this. If these moral duties exist and apply to everyone everywhere, and if they don't come from our fellow human beings, they can't just come from something impersonal like blind forces of nature. For example, if you are driving and you see someone in danger, you don't just ignore him because it's not your problem. Your sense of duty tells you to help. That sense of right and wrong must come from somewhere personal, like a higher being such as God, to whom we are accountable because obligation can only be felt in relation to a being. Without that, why would we feel obligated to do what is right? We often measure ourselves against a moral ideal, striving to be better people. But we often fall short of these moral ideals because we are imperfect people. We are flawed humans. No matter how hard we try, we cannot live up to the moral ideals set up by the moral law within us. Another thing, moral values aren't just abstract ideas. They are qualities or properties that belong to real individuals. You talk of moral values or ideals in reference to person. You can't talk about moral values or ideals in isolation. For example, when we talk about being fair or being good, we are describing someone who lives by those values. Like I mentioned earlier, no one is perfect. No one is fair all the time or honest all the time. But we still aspire to the moral ideal of honesty, fairness, and so on. However, we may fall short. But this moral ideal of perfect honesty, perfect fairness, perfect goodness exists. So what does this moral ideal, or rather, who does this moral ideal describe, since moral values are properties of persons? This suggests that there must be a being who perfectly embodies and upholds these moral ideals perfectly. This being, who does not fail in keeping to the moral ideal, must be divine, transcendent, and is called God. When we break a rule or principle, we often feel guilty or ashamed. But have you ever wondered why? It's because it's not abstract rule itself that makes us feel bad. For example, we can't feel bad for offending a stone because a stone has no feelings or will. For us to feel guilty or have a sense of having offended, there must be, of necessity, a person involved. So why do we feel guilty when we go against the moral law within us? You could argue that we feel guilty for having hurt our fellow humans, but that is not entirely true. Even when no one is hurt or will ever be hurt, we still feel guilty for going against the moral law within us. For example, think about cheating on a test. Even if no one catches you, you still feel guilty. This must mean that there's a being, a divine, invisible person behind the moral law, since guilt must be felt in relation to persons. That, my friend, is one proof of the existence of God. Euthyphro's dilemma. Euthyphro is a character in one of Plato's writings who poses a couple of questions that either make God subject to objective morality or an arbitrary source of morality. The supposed dilemma goes like this: does God do something because it is good, which would imply that there is a standard of good beyond God, or is it good because God does it, which would imply that God arbitrarily makes up or chooses what is morality? So, which? When it comes to morality, God doesn't look up to another standard beyond himself. If he has to look up to another standard, then he wouldn't be God. The standard beyond him would be God. Nor is God arbitrary. There is nothing arbitrary about an unchanging standard of good. The third alternative then is the answer. The answer is that God's nature is the standard. God himself is the unchanging standard of good. Can we be moral without God? The short answer is yes. A person may read a book and understand it and perhaps put into action what he has read from the book without knowing the author of the book. But without knowing the author of the book, there's no way to account for the origin or foundation of that book. Same with morality. An atheist may be moral. In fact, there are many atheists that are more moral or who live more moral lives than religious persons. But without knowing the author of morality, there's no way an atheist can account for its origin. They may know morality, that is, they may have knowledge of morality, which in philosophy is called epistemology, but they can't account for the foundation or origin of morality, which is grounded in God's nature. That is, they cannot account for the ontology of morality. Barriers to belief. Many objections to the existence of God are purely emotional rather than intellectual. For some persons, perhaps a religious person betrayed them, or perhaps they feel God disappointed them. Perhaps someone was sick and they prayed for the person. They prayed to God for the person and he didn't get healed, but instead died. So they give up believing there's a God. In fact, to be fair, some Christians believe in God because belief in God is merely attractive. The idea of a blissful heaven appeals to them. But real faith must be grounded on proof, else it is simply sentimental. To echo what Blaise Pascal said, people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. To wrap up, we have covered some grounds. Let's do a recap of what we have learned. First, objective morality exists and point to a divine moral lawgiver. Secondly, the moral law is universal, prescriptive, absolute, and divine. And lastly, the moral argument for God's existence are strong and compelling. However, barriers to believing in God's existence are largely emotional rather than intellectual. We have come to the end of this video. I want to encourage you to share your comments below, like, share, and subscribe to this video. I'm just starting out. You can support this channel in whatever way you can. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we will explore more fascinating topics about the existence of God. Until then, take care and keep questioning. Bye for now.